Hello, good morning. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, the audience online. Uh, so I'm not going to make history by being the supervisor who chairs the defense, but but I'm here to introduce our chair for Miss Juliet Ssematimba's defense. Dr. Charlotte Karunji Mafumbo from the Department of History. She's going to chair today's defense, and I will be the most quiet person today so I can use this time to take a lot of notes. Dr. Mafumbo, without further ado, please come and take over your role as the chair.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, members online. It gives me so much pleasure this morning to step in such big shoes and chair this defense. I would like to welcome you all here and welcome the candidate and congratulate you for coming this far. We're going to have an interaction with you, and the panelists will include Dr. Juliet Ssematimba from the School of Women and Gender Studies. On the panel will also be Dr. John Balijira, Dr. Jessica Gorovia, Dr. Martin Chamanywa, Dr. Zeidi Sechito, and Dr. Charlotte Karunji Mafumbo. And lastly, we'll also have Dr. Edgar Taylor. Juliet, you'll have 30 minutes in which to present your work. And I'll put up a small note to indicate. But I also want us to use the clock at the back to guide us. And I also want to say, don't rush. 30 minutes are too many, but I'm sure members here will appreciate if we can steal a few more minutes if the time is not enough for you. Our critical reader will take 60 minutes to engage you. And after that, the examination committee members and the panelists will take you through. We've assigned 30 minutes to that activity, after which we shall open it to the public audience. In the meantime, we're relying on Professor Farouk to keep downloading comments that are sent online. And so if we don't have enough time, we shall still share with you some of the issues and questions that will arise online. I think that marks the end of my communication. And I once again would like to welcome you and give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. My topic is indigenous salt making technology at Chibiro Salt Gardens in Western Uganda, starting from 1894 to 1997. It was supervised by
Associate Professor Chask Elizabeth, and Dr. Kanakwa Pamela. I'll start with the introduction and background. In this study, I'm going to be using words like technology, and in this case, I'm referring technology to be how do these people make their salt. And then I'm also going to be using salt gardens. Unlike in other mines at Chibiro, their mines are referred to as gardens, and they are referred to as gardens because of mainly two reasons. One, these gardens have sustained them all throughout their stay in Chibiro, and at the same time, the work is carried by the women, so they look at it as a garden which does not get exhausted but can sustain them all throughout. That picture you are seeing there, it is one of the ladies carrying on the process in the garden, and another person is the researcher together with the guide. Then I'll be also using indigenous technology. Indigenous technology refers to the art, science, skills, tools, traditions, and beliefs that are put forward by the people with important relevance to them and to sustain them throughout the experience in the community. So when I talk about the introduction of my study, I realized that technologies have been advancing in different areas, but with the Chibiro case, it has remained as indigenous technology, which is based on using the simple tools and the wisdom and the knowledge based on traditions. So together, as I talk about that, my study looked at the continuities, changes, and the survival of this technology, which is basically carried out by the women who are the ones controlling these Chibiro salt gardens. And even the inheritance is on the side of the women, whereby it is from the mother to the daughter, and even the mother-in-law can give a garden to the daughter-in-law. Basically, Chibiro is found if I talk about where Chibiro is found, when I talk about the history of the salt making technologies, there has been different technologies and methods all over the world, and one of them is the underground technology. Where they use the underground technology, this is where they use especially the modern methods, for example, the drilling methods to produce large quantity of the salt. And then we also have the solar evaporation. Under the solar evaporation, they use ponds and especially the water from the seas to carry on the salt. And under solar evaporation, there is use of the mixed methods where they use both the modern and the indigenous methods. Then we have also the technology of the saline soils salt. And this is where Chibiro falls. This is where there is a mixture of soils and water, and then the boiling to produce the salt. So in most cases where we have the technology of the saline soils, they specifically use the indigenous methods. So looking at the location of Chibiro Salt Gardens, Chibiro is located in the western part of Uganda. It is located in the Albertine Rift, whereby it is also located in a rain shadow area, which cannot support agriculture. Therefore, there are basically two main economic activities in Chibiro. That is the salt making, which is controlled entirely by the women. And there is also fishing from Lake Albert, which is carried on by the men. So when I talk about the Chibilo, it is located in the western, on the south of Lake Albert, and it is basically after Hoima, and then you proceed to Chigorovia, then to Chibiro Salt Gardens. So that map basically shows the location of Chibiro on the bigger map of Uganda, and then basically the small where from Hoima up to the location. Looking at my research problem, I basically looked at the different literatures of other people. For example, we had Kona, who also wrote about Chibiro. We had people like Kamhangire, Uzoike, among others. But in all their studies, they are not bringing out the technology. And at the same time, we see that there has been a lot of advancement in technologies. But for the case of Chibiro, the women have kept on controlling the salt, and they are using the indigenous technology. So using the indigenous technology, that means that it misses the sweeping narrative where they believe that the colonialists had really come and they had disorganized much of the African technologies. In the case of Chibiro, it had not disorganized that technology, but it remained into existence. Therefore, this study went out to find out why has this technology survived in this area. The objectives of the study, I had the main objective, which was all about examining the changes and continuities of indigenous salt making technology at Chibiro and how it shaped the Bunyoro Chitara kingdom. It was guided by 3 specific objectives. One was to examine the role of Chibiro salt in the organization of the Bunyoro Chitara kingdom. Basically, where I'm looking at the role of Chibiro salt in state formation. I had also to explain the stages involved in the indigenous salt making technology practices, and also to discuss the changes and continuities of salt making technology at Chibiro. This study was guided by specifically 2 theories. One of them is the perennialism theory of 1954, which was put forward by Aquinas Thomas and later promoted by Robert Hutchins and Ada. With this perennialism theory, it bases itself on the philosophical fundamentals of unchangeable beliefs, values, skills, art, science, and knowledge. So with the perennialism, they don't just believe in change, but they believe that we can stay with our traditional beliefs, taboos, knowledge, our science, and etc. So with this perennialism theory, I found it as a theory which can guide my study, since I was looking at the indigenous technology which has existed in the area for decades and decades. And then, since it does not believe in just a mere change, I realized that it was really a good theory to guide my study. As much as it guided my study, it had the criticisms, and one of them is where they are saying that the perennialism theory believes in conservatism, and it believes that the content is very weak. So in this case, the researcher did not agree with the criticism, because conservatism does not entirely mean that you are weak. And in this case, as much as they have stayed with the beliefs, traditions, skills, and tools which are indigenous, it does not mean that the people of Chibiro are weak or they cannot carry out anything. When I looked at the perennialism theory, I realized that it could not answer all the questions that I had. Therefore, I had to bring in the liberal feminism theory so that it can supplement, since the perennialism theory could not explain why this indigenous technology was in the hands of the women. The liberal feminism theory states, it was started by the feminist movement, and for it fights or it advocates for women's superiority, and it also believes that women can also do something better than men. In Chibiro, unlike in other areas, you'll find that it is only the women who are operating in these salt gardens. Therefore, I found it necessary to use the liberal feminism theory so as to explain the survival continuities and changes carried out by these women in the technology. Significance and justification of the study. Since we are in the time of technological change, this study is significant in a way that it gives evidence for the existence of indigenous technology and how the indigenous technology is very useful to the survival and the stay of the people in especially a dry area like Chibiro. It also contributes to the historiography of Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom. In this, you realize that with the Chibiro, which was a very important source of economy in Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom, if this history comes out clearly, it would be contributing to the historiography of the kingdom. This study also brings a scholarship about the centrality of women in state building. Since Chibiro is controlled by the women in the salt making, with this study, it brings out the role of the women in state building, especially the Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom, where they really had a bigger role in building the empire as a result of this indigenous salt making technology used in Chibiro. It also contributes to the documentation of a very unique practice that has survived over time. The unique practice I'm talking about is the indigenous technology itself. You realize that in 1997, Chibiro was enlisted on the UNESCO World Heritage Tentative List. And why it was enlisted, it was basically because of this unique practice, which is the indigenous technology carried out by the women, and it has shown the creativity of the women and also how they have managed to survive in this dry area where they cannot carry out agriculture. My study was guided by a historical research design together with a quantitative research approach. I used a historical research design because it can enable me, because it enables the researcher to collect data, especially on a behavior or a human behavior. When I look at Chibiro, people are involved in this technology, and with the historical research design together with the qualitative research approach, it gives the researcher an opportunity even to participate in the questioning study and also to have the face-to-face interaction with the people, together with carrying on the data or collecting the data from both the primary and the secondary sources. Using the primary sources, I used the archives, especially the archives from Hoima district, archives from the mountains of the Mon, archives from the National Archives, and also archives from Makelele and Chambogo libraries. In these archives, I came across the diaries of people like Sir Samuel Baker. I came across the minutes of Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom. I also came across some of the newspapers that could really guide the study. Together with the observation, I was able to collect a lot of data using even the oral history. The study population, I managed to interview 40 people. 40 people, 30 were women, and 5 of the women were the retired salt makers, and then the 25 were the active salt makers, and then 10 of the population were men. I specifically interviewed more women than men because the activity is carried out by the women. That's why I had to interview more women than the men. I used the purposive sampling technique and snowball and convenience, whereby with the purposive, I really interviewed those people who were in Chibiro and from 45 years and above, whom I believed that they had the information concerning the survival of the technology. Using the snowball, this is where, after getting the guide, the person could take me, especially to the Basimba women, who are believed to be the first women to stay in the area, and they knew what the technology was all about. Under the convenience, I could interview these people, some under appointments and some at their own convenience, where they could give you maybe come back at this time, or from the gardens or from their homes. Under the research instruments, I used an interview guide, and then the data processing and analysis. I actually used the manual way of analyzing data, and basically under the content analysis, where I could transcribe and then translate the information from the field into the different sub-themes and themes into the study. I carried out ethical clearance right from the department, then to the university. I also got clearance from the National Council for Science and Technology. Also got clearance from the RDCs and the LC of Chibiro Salt area. Under the objective 1, which is all about the role of Chibiro Salt in the organization of Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom. Chibiro Salt led to the building of the Abalusula Army. Before leading to the building of the Abalusula Army, Chibiro was put under Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom in the 1490s during the time of Omukama Rukidi. He basically took on the control of Chibiro, basically because of its salt. And when he took over, he used what we could call the indirect rule, where he used the chiefs to collect the salt and then take the salt to the kingdom. When they took the salt to the kingdom, this salt was exchanged into other weapons through the trade, and in this it helped to build the Abalusula Army, which Abalusula Army was very important in the development of Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom, and even later in the resistance during the time of Kabalega, when he was resisting the British rule. So it is because of the Chibiro salt that sustained Kabalega's resistance. When he was trying to resist the British, he could get the salt from Chibiro, then exchange that salt within the trade to get the modern weapons, which modern weapons he used to fight against the British. Chibiro salt was also used as a currency before the coming of the Kawari shows. People could exchange goods, and the currency they were using was the chibiro salt, either in form of the cones or how many cones could be compared to the commodity that the person wanted. Chibiro salt also led to unity and marriage. Unity and marriage in a way that they could use the salt to unify the different societies and also to bring back the unity in case there were disagreements within the societies. For instance, we had an exchange of the Chibiro salt with Uganda, and also at the same time within the Chibiro salt, there is what led to the blood pact, whereby different traders could make a blood pact using the Chibiro salt, which made them to be brothers. And in this case, that blood pact or that brotherhood could bring the friendship and the unity within the people, which promoted the trade within the area. Chibiro salt also was used as taxes and tributes payment to the Bunyoro kingdom and also during the time of colonialism, whereby the women could produce the salt, give it to the men, use the men to pay the taxes or to pay the tributes to the kingdom. Then Chibiro salt has been so important as a domestic and a medicinal purpose. To the Bunyoro Chitara kingdom, the women used to take salt to the king as a way of giving him the salt to be used in the kingdom, but then at the same time, it was used as the medicinal value. If I can quote that, when I was interviewing some of the people from the kingdom, they feel they are missing that salt because some of them were saying, unlike during that time of Kabalega, today we have either to buy the salt to give to the king, or the women no longer just provide the salt for free. So that clearly indicated that the kingdom needed this salt for domestic and medicinal purpose. Under objective 2, which is explaining the indigenous salt technology practices, I look at Chibiro as an area with totally a unique method, which involves recycling this soil to produce the salt. And when they are carrying out the recycling, they are using indigenous skills, taboos, tools, and techniques to make the salt. So when I look at the indigenous salt, it involves, the indigenous salt making technology involves basically 4 stages. And in most cases, for the girls or for the women to learn these stages, it is transmitted on using the word of mouth from one woman to another. So discussing the stages of indigenous technology, I have the different tools used in the different stages. In this first one, I'm having a hoe, and usually that hoe is used in the first stage of the preparation of the garden, where they use it to remove the grass and then start a new garden. We have also the oroho. Oroho, it is that wooden boat-like tool which is used to carry the soils in the process. Within the roho, there is that metallic thing. It is called a chisinga, and this chisinga is used in the scrapping and the leaching stage. We have also the flying pan and the jerry can. The jerry can is used to carry the solution from the gardens to the homes, and then the flying pan is the one used in the boiling stage. Still under stage 1, there is that preparation. It is called the preparation of the new salt garden. This is where the women start now the technology or starting how to make the salt. The salt gardens are locally known as echibuga. This first side, we are seeing that short grass. That is how Chibiro looks before starting making a salt garden. So using the hose, the women remove that grass and then start making the salt gardens. That heap of the soil indicates that already dry soil, which will later on be used in the leaching stage. On the other side, we have already the salt gardens being prepared. I have that lady because she requested to be part of the work. That's why she's in there. And by that time, she's done with preparing the salt garden, so she's leaving to another salt garden. Stage 2 is what we call the spreading, drying, and scraping the soil. In stage 2, usually the women use the oroho or that wooden boat-like tool, and they get the dry soils which are got from other salt gardens. They bring it, then pour or scatter it on the already prepared salt garden. These stones you see here, they act as the boundaries, and at the same time later on they are going to be used in another stage. There are those water streams in there. Those ones are coming from the Kabiga hot spring, which is the heart of Chibiro. They are ever warm and the water tastes as salt. So when the woman scatters that water on the ground, it is given 2 to 3 days depending on the weather. If it is a sunny day, it can take 2 days, and then the garden will show the white things on top or on the surface, which means that now the salt is ready for another stage. One side shows a lady from Chibiro and another side shows a researcher in participating in the stage. That is what we call okwabia. It starts with the spreading, and then later it is given time for the sun to also take its action through the drying. Later, the women use the singer, the metallic weapon, to scrap off the salt, the soils which will be used in the third stage. That is the third stage of soil making, which we call the leaching of the salt, or it is called kwitila or mwizilo. Usually omwizilo is the solution which is got after. In this other first thing, we see the saucepans, whereby some, for instance, the upper one, it is showing a saucepan. That saucepan, the big one, is called chikanigo. And then beneath it, there is a small saucepan which is called akatere kezo. The women, after scrubbing in the second stage, they get that salt which is already showing, they get the soils which are already showing salt, and then they bring them using the oroho, pour them in the saucepan, the upper one, or the chikanigo. When it is full, for instance, this lady in red is having another small saucepan to go and fetch water from the channels that they dig in the first stage. That water is mixed up with the soils in the saucepan. When they mix it, usually those saucepans are perforated, and then that is why we have the akatelekezo down, or the small saucepan, so that as the leaching process is taking place, that water is poured or percolated through that small saucepan. The other lady in green, she's already taking the solution. She's taking the solution. So she's pouring the solution into the jerry cans to be taken at home. That is stage 4, which we call the boiling of the salty solution. When the women get the solution, usually that solution is kept at home for some days, from a week to 2 weeks. And they believe that the more they keep the solution, the more it increases the salt content. But at the same time, the researcher got to know that usually these women, since it is a daily activity, they have a lot of solution being kept at home. So they start with that one which was already kept and then keep on boiling. In the boiling stage, there must be firewood, and it usually takes 1 to 2 hours depending on how good the firewood is. Those cones you see aside, that is when already the salt is getting ready to be sold to the garden. Usually they boil and there is evaporation, which leaves the porridge-like thing, and that porridge-like solution is the one that they keep on pouring to make that particular cone. In the other picture, that is a researcher trying to get involved in the boiling situation. This is part of the salt, how it looks like when it is ready for the market. In that other slide, that is Chibiro salt ready for the market. These two ladies, usually with the Chibiro, the topography is not good, so the means of transport is usually by foot. Those women leave Chibiro very early in the morning, and they have to take the salt to the market that is in Chigolobia Trading Center, and their market day is usually Wednesday and Saturdays. On the other side, they are already in the market, and one of the research assistants is trying to bargain to get the salt. So looking at the objective 3, which is all about the survival of the indigenous salt, some of the factors are colonial and post-colonial policies. These colonial and post-colonial policies, for example, in the colonial government, especially in 1953, it came out with a policy, which policy was in transforming and helping the Katwe-Kassai salt works and not helping Chibiro salt works. This was after the tax that had been raised in Chibiro. In 1952, Chibiro had raised less money compared to that of Katwe. So the colonial government came up with the policies, which policies were only in for helping Katwe and not Chibiro. This would sound as if it is negative, but it was a kind of a blessing for the survival of this technology, because these policies have not really exposed the Chibiro maybe to the outside community, which outside community could also maybe come up with other techniques to disorganize the indigenous technology. When we talk about the colonial policies and the post-colonial policies, even after colonialism, the governments that came after, for instance, the government of Amin also carried out improvement in Katwe and not improvement at Chibiro. That is where we see the local construction coming in to carry out construction at Katwe, and that is why for Katwe they are having both the modern and the indigenous technologies. But at the same time, these policies have denied the transport to this area. And since there is no transport means to reach the area, you realize that very few people go there and they couldn't really do much on the technology. Then there is also the geographic climate and the soils. With geography, Chibiro is blessed with the Kabinga hot spring. This is the heart of Chibiro, whereby they are able to get this water, and this water, as much as it is hot and warm, but at the same time it is salty. It is this water that they use in the leaching process, which brings out the solution as a salty solution and then later on used in the boiling system. At the same time, Chibiro is blessed with the salty soils. Their soils are salty, and it enables this indigenous technology to keep on. With the escarpment and the narrow plains, you find that Chibiro has a very sharp escarpment which cannot allow transport, but at the same time, Chibiro being located in a rain shadow area makes it not to have any other activity taking place but salt making. Then there is the role of the spiritual belief in Nyasimba. Nyasimba God actually is the God behind the indigenous salt technology. The people of Chibiro believe that the technology or the technological practices that they are carrying out were handed over to them by this Nyasimba God. With Nyasimba, this was the first woman to stay in Chibiro after coming with her husband. And when they stayed there, they got so many dreams. Some went to the man and others went to the woman. But when the woman got the dream, he was supposed to sacrifice a baby girl so as to stay in that particular area. Though they did not sacrifice at first, but the woman lost the pregnancy, and these people believe that after losing the pregnancy, the man got a dream which was asking him whether he had seen the power of the God. And in this dream, the God told him, I told you, you had to sacrifice for me if you are to stay in the area. Since you've not sacrificed for me, I decided to take your baby girl. Later on, the woman conceived another pregnancy, but in this they agreed, and the agreement was between the man, who is now the Musimba man, believing in the dream that if I get another child, I'll agree to sacrifice that child. When the woman produced, the man got the child and sacrificed that child at Motebere, that place there. When he sacrificed the child, that night the woman got a dream which gave him the entire stages of the indigenous technology. And this also basically explains why the men are not involved in the technology, but it is the women involved in the technology. Then the role of the women and their inheritance system. With the women, they are the people who carry on salt making. They are the people who control the salt making. They own these gardens. And in this case, there are no inheritance wars between the women to whom to own the garden, because they know that it is on the side of the matrilineal, and the women keep on passing the knowledge from one generation to another. So they have really played a big role in sustaining the technology. Then we have the role of the rituals, and under the rituals and the customs, we have one of sacrificing. When I talk of the Mukamila, That is a sacred place within Chibiro. It is a sacred place because that is where the first sacrifice took place. And on this sacrifice, they sacrificed 3 things. That is a girl and then 2 goats. The 2 goats, one had to come from the king and another one had to come from the chief. This started during the time of Kabalega, when he really wanted to stop the sacrifice of a girl or of human beings. But still the people, especially the Basimba people, believed that that was not a communication between the women and their Nyasimba god. So they kept on going on with the sacrifice of human beings. Though today this has changed, but still the Basimba women believe that though they don't practically carry out the sacrifice, Nyasimba god still sacrifices for herself. And this is where they are saying that every year at least one woman or a girl dies within the salt gardens, or he dies at the Mtebile place, which is also a sacred place where they could always sacrifice the people from there. So these people still believe that it is a sacrifice which has kept or which has led to the survival of the technology. There are also rituals where they believe that one is not supposed to play sex within the salt gardens, and this has kept the salt gardens as sacred places, leading to the continual of the technology. Then the enlistment of the Chibiro Salt Gardens on the UNESCO World Heritage Tentative List in 1997 has also increased their love and morale and interest in their technology. These people believe that they were recognized in the world since they were put on the World Tentative List, and this has enabled them to continue love their technology. And then there is also the existence of the market. Since these people make the salt and people are able to buy it, it enables them to continue with the technology. In my conclusions, which are based on the objective, I conclude by saying that Chibiro salt was so important in state formation, especially during the time of Bunyoro Chitara Kingdom. And I also conclude by saying that the indigenous technology, which involves the 4 stages, they need each other for them to make the salt. Therefore, they cannot do without any of the 4 stages. I also conclude by emphasizing the role of spiritual beliefs, the role of women, and the geographical reasons that are very important in the continuity of the technology. My study recommends about the preservation of Chibiro and its knowledge. Why I recommend about the preservation of Chibiro? During the time of interviews, Chibiro is under threat, especially after the discovery of the oil in the area. People believe that they are going to be displaced and their technology is going to die as they are being displaced. So I recommend that they can preserve Chibiro with its technology and knowledge alongside other developments. I also recommend for infrastructure development so that Chibiro can continue produce the salt, but when people can easily reach the area and when they can also get market without traveling about 5 kilometers to Chigolobia. There is need to sensitize the people of Chibiro, especially when it comes to the 4th stage, where they are using the firewood to carry out the boiling, that since firewood is scarce, they can use coal and maybe still continue with their indigenous technology. I recommend the blending of both technologies in the community, that is the indigenous technology and the modern technologies, especially when it comes to the packing, so that these people can be able to pack their salt and it can be taken by the people easily. I also recommend that let Chibiro be now enlisted on the World Heritage Site list other than being on a tentative list. With that work, I have been able to come up with 2 publications. One has been published, that is Chibiro Indigenous Salt Making Technology and Uganda's Economic War. It has been published by the African Journal of History and Geography. And then another one, Exploring the Role of Women at Chibiro Salt Gardens. It is under review with the Journal of Historical Association. I acknowledge and appreciate the support given to me by Geda Enkel Foundation, especially under our coordinator, Dr. Edgar Nabutanyi, Dr. Levis, Madam Esther and Duncan. Thank you so much. I also appreciate the support given by Andrew Meron Foundation under Dr. Pamela. Thank you so much. It enabled me to come up with that paper that has been published. I thank my mentors, Professor Charles K. and Dr. Pamela. Thank you so much. I thank Department of History, Archaeology and Heritage Studies, Makerere University, whereby every now and then Dr. Shaud would ask, when are you presenting? When are you presenting? Those questions have enabled me to come far. Thank you so much. I also thank my mother department, that is History Department of Chambogo University. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I thank my COVID cohort members. You are safe. That is Fatuma, Maureen, Naomi, Sam, and others. Thank you. Thank you so much. My family and friends, those who have been in this journey, thank you so much. My research team, I expected one to be here, but I think he has failed. Thank you so much. And lastly, I thank the Banyachibiro people who accepted to participate in the study, which has yielded those findings. Thank you.
I think give another round of applause. I'd like to welcome you back from Kibero Salt Mines. And now would like to thank you for the presentation and ask our independent reader, Dr. Juliet Ssematimba, to take you on. He's a specialist in gender and livelihoods as well as conservation. So you're very welcome, Dr. Mugisa.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Juliet, thank you. I know it has been a lonely journey, not so? I know you must have sacrificed a lot to reach this far. I wish you well. I happen to have read your work. It was very interesting. However, there are some gray spaces that you have to clear now. Yeah, I did not understand them, so I came up with some few questions. One, can we have the topic? Yeah, indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro Gardens in Western Uganda, 1894 to 1997. Why this period?
I chose 1894 because of two reasons. One, in 1894, Emily Pasha and Colville attacked Chibero Salt Gardens, destroyed them, and then after 2 weeks they had to leave, and the Chibero people came back and continued with their technology. So that is one of the reasons why I chose 1894. But at the same time, 1894 is the time when Uganda is declared a British protectorate. Well, 1997, I chose that year because that is when Chibiro is recognized worldwide and it is put on the UNESCO World Heritage Tentative List. Thank you so much.
But this is a period. It is a long period, so you had to explain the periods. Okay, we shall say that. Then next, what comes into your mind when you say indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro Gardens? To me, it looks like a statement. Why did you analyze? Does the topic or the title speak to what you analyzed? Do you get the point, the question? Yeah, it is indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro. Then the question is, so what? Why did you want to look up?
In the analysis under indigenous salt making technology, I looked at its continuities, its changes, and the survival. What exactly has led to this survival of the technology besides the modern technology?
Yes, the point is, do you still want to maintain that topic? Because to me, it seems that you left out some. You have been talking about the women's involvement. So did you want to communicate the involvement? Did you have been comparing it, you have been making it a comparative study with the Katwe and the rest? Is it a comparative study? Or did you, what did you want to look at exactly?
In this study, I looked at the survival of this technology.
Okay, good. But what I expected was probably you'd have given why the indigenous salt making technology has survived at Kibiro Gardens, such that you give the reasons you have been giving. It has survived because of certain reasons or factors. So it would have been good to make the topic more talking. Okay, like it could be either technological and cultural aspects of indigenous salt making, such that someone gets to know that you were teasing certain variables. Okay, next. In chapter 1, that is the general introduction, you give technological resistance. But the question is, why has the Kibiro salt makers resisted adopting modern salt technologies?
Why have the Chibiro persisted with the technology? It is basically explained by the belief in the Nyasimba god and the geography of the area.
Good. You have answered it because it's the beliefs, not so. Thank you. Now we go to the problem statement. You have ably said, or you argue, that the indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro has survived despite advancements in modern salt production. Could you clarify the specific mechanisms or reasons that you believe explain this survival?
I beg your pardon.
In the problem statement, you clearly state or argue that the indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro has survived despite advancements in modern salt production. Right? Then, could you please clarify the specific mechanisms or reasons that you believe explain this survival?
When I talk about the modern technologies, I'm saying that people are using tractors or the drilling when they are making salt. But with the Chibiro, they are only using the simple tools and the indigenous technology. And the main reasons as to why they are using this, it is because of the role of the women, their geography, and the Nyasimba god, which has enabled them to continue carrying on this technology.
Good. Next. Still in the problem statement, you assert that technology has somehow affected, or modernity has somehow affected the technologies being used at Kibiro. Can you elaborate on the degree to which modern technologies have influenced salt mining at Kibiro? Has Kibiro been influenced by modernity?
Basically, looking at the technology of Chibiro, it has not been influenced by modernity.
Okay.
They are still using indigenous.
Okay. Then next. You mentioned, still in the problem statement, that salt making at Kibiro has persisted for centuries, but the reasons behind this continuity remain unclear. Are there any specific historical events, such as colonialism and state policies, that might have contributed to the resistance of this practice?
Yes, they are there. That is why when I'm talking about objective number 3, which talks about the survival, I clearly put the colonial policies, and under some of the colonial policies, I'm looking at the policy of mines providing taxes to the colonial government. But when it reached the year 1952, they compared the revenue or the taxes from Chibiro with that of Katwe. And when they realized that the revenue from Katwe was more than that of Chibiro, they opted to improve Katwe and not to improve the technology at Chibiro. So such a policy, which was to neglect Chibiro, led to the survival of its technology.
Okay, good. But still, on technological adaptation and innovation, you mentioned that although technology has remained largely unchanged, I'm quoting your words, although technology has remained largely unchanged, or maybe let me rephrase it. Are there other subtle innovations and adaptations within the indigenous salt making technologies that have been adopted?
With the indigenous technology at Chibiro, under the stages, they have not adopted changes, but they have been able to adopt changes in terms of the tools used. That is when from the pottery tools, they started using the saucepans or the metallic tools. And at the same time, we see them also using the plastic tools. So those are some of the changes within.
So would you continue to assert that it has not changed? Technology has not changed? Okay, we continue. Can we have the specific objectives? Good. The first or the main is to examine changes and continuities of indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro and how it has shaped Bunyoro Kitara kingdom. Then my question comes in that this objective is examining changes and continuities in indigenous salt making practice at Kibiro, specifically focusing on the persistence and role in shaping Bunyoro Kitara kingdom. How do you define it to shape? How do you define the word or the concept shape?
In this study, the concept shape is examined under the specific role number 1, where I look at the role of Chibiro salt in the political, economic, and social shaping of the Bunyoro Chitara kingdom. How did the salt contribute to the organization of Bunyoro Chitara politically, economically, and socially?
Now, can we go to the topic? So would I be right to say that you are looking at the contribution of salt to Bunyoro Kitara kingdom?
You would be right, but that would mean that it is only one objective, and yet the study has more than one objective. I looked at more than just the role, but the technology itself.
So the question is, do you see that general objective in the topic? Okay, we continue. We go to objective, the specific objective 1. You mentioned that Kibiro Sorot played a role in the organization of the Bunyoro Kitara kingdom before colonialization, or before colonialism. Could you provide more clarity on the exact nature of this role?
With the Chibiro salt, the kings of Bunyoro, for example, Kabalega, used to acquire Chibiro salt, and when he acquired this salt, he could exchange it and get the modern weapons, for instance, the guns, which guns he used in the resistance of colonialism in the kingdom.
Good, still that takes us to the contribution. True?
Yes.
Okay. Objective 2, specific objective 2. I see that it is indigenous technology and the stages of salt production. Was your study analyzing the stages of salt production or the technology in salt production?
Thank you so much. For the study to understand the technology, as I'm using the word indigenous salt technology to mean the practices, the art, the science, the skills, the tools, and the stages involved. That's why I came up with objective number 2, so that I'm able to explain what exactly is involved in this indigenous technology. And that is how I had to analyze and explain the stages that are involved.
Do they use different technologies at different stages, or at all stages they use the same technologies?
If I can pick out some of the elements of indigenous technology at every different stage, for instance, they are using different knowledge when they are carrying out these stages. They are using different tools, and even the skills are different in the carrying, in the making of this salt in these different stages.
Thank you. That is good. That's right. That's why I wanted to know whether different tools were used at different stages. That's all. It lacked even in the presentation, but it was in the report, so I had to bring it out. I wanted you to explain on it. Specific objective 3. It is on the survival, continuities, and the changes in indigenous salt making technology at Kibiro. By the way, how do you define indigenous in your study?
I looked at indigenous as the local knowledge or the local practices or traditions, tools that have an impact or a relevance to the people to survive in a particular experience and environment.
So indigenous, it involved also the tools that were made from within the area, Bunyoro Kitara?
Yes.
Okay, good. Third objective still, you talked about surviving, meaning the survival, discussing the survival and the continuities and the changes in indigenous salt making technology, particularly during the colonial period. How did you balance the historical perspective with the technological evolution of salt making over time?
Using the primary sources that I used to collect the data, this is how it enabled me to collect the data that showed that survival over the time.
So would I be right to say that you are focusing on how the technology has remained the same, or
Yes.
how it has evolved in response to external factors? So if you looked at the continuities, the survival and the changes, how did you analyze the changes vis-a-vis the, like we can talk of staggeredness?
Thank you so much. I looked at the changes within the technology basing on other technologies. For instance, when I was reading, I came across different technologies being used to make salt. And that is why I had to check and see if at Chibiro it is indigenous salt making technology. Since the time these people started making salt, has this technology changed in anything? For instance, has it changed in terms of the stages? Has it changed in terms of the skills? Has it changed in terms of the tools? Or has it changed in terms of the knowledge? That's what I was basing on.
Thank you. And that's how it is in your report. Now we move to methodology. It was your chapter 2. methodology. Okay. Given the historical and the technological focus of your study, how did you ensure that your research is both historically grounded and contextually relevant to the current debates on the preservation of indigenous technology?
I ensured this.
I repeat the question.
Yes.
Where I'm not clear, please you ask. I'm saying that given the historical and the technological focus of your study, how did you ensure that your research is both historically grounded and contextually relevant to the current debates on the preservation of indigenous technologies?
Using the historical research design, which enables the researcher to analyze the past in relation to understand the current situation. I use the historical research in collecting the data, which data was also coming from the past, but at the same time, I would relate it with what the people are saying to see whether it is really historical and it is viable to be used in the study. Under the preservation, that is why it is also coming out in the recommendations where I'm saying using the importance of this indigenous salt making technology, which is in the study. I believe the policymakers can use it to have Chibiro remaining as an indigenous salt making site, preserving other developments.
Okay, good. Another question. You intended to examine continuities and changes during the colonial period. True? Is it true? That you intended to examine continuities and changes during the colonial period. Now, my question is, how did the colonial forces directly influence local community practices in salt making technologies?
During the time of colonialism and during the time of the establishment of colonial rule in Bunyoro, the colonialists realized that it was the Chibiro salt that was giving a lot of power to Kabaliga. That's why in 1894, people like Emily Pasha together with the Colville attacked the area so that they are able to weaken Kabaliga, since this was the source of the salt that he was using to exchange and getting weapons, which weapons he was using to fight them. So these colonial forces simply occupied the area. But since these people were using the indigenous technology, the colonial forces did not really understand how to use them to carry on the salt. And that is why later on we see them leaving the area and only influencing this area by putting or forcing them to pay tax, which was still equivalent to their salt. Later on, we see them taking the salt to the colonial governments as a way of influencing. So practically, the colonial forces did not influence the indigenous practice of the salt at the area.
Okay. Then you mentioned that women play a very big role in salt production. In simple terms, that you highlight the role of women in salt production. But did you analyze, why didn't you analyze how, or the power dynamics between the men and the women in influencing salt production at Kibiro? Okay. Can we understand whether you, or did you bother to unearth the gender dynamics that influenced the survival of the indigenous technology in terms of labor, division of labor, decision making, either at the household level or it could be at the kingdom level? Did they participate in salt production because culture assigned them that role and the men were in another? Because in your book, you say that you articulate it very well that men were involved in fishing, while women were involved in salt production or mining. So, was it a gender division of labor, or can you explain?
Thank you so much. If I'm to examine in terms of gender, even in the book, there is somewhere where I say under the taboos that the men take it as a taboo for them to get involved in salt making. They believe that this is a women activity and they base their belief on the Nyasimba god. They believe that the Nyasimba was a woman since they sacrificed a woman. So they believe that since this god who came in form of a dream asked for a sacrifice of a woman and gave the stages of the technology to the woman and not the man, it is the role of the woman to carry out salt and the men participate in other activities. Then on the side of decision making at the kingdom, the Chibiro women did not influence any decision making at the kingdom, despite the fact that they could donate the salt to the king. Thank you.
Thank you. I think before we go to methodology, let's still go to the theoretical framework. Okay. I see you used that, you use that theory to explain the survival and continuity of indigenous technology at Kibiro. Can you clarify how you distinguished between enduring cultural elements and those that may have evolved or adapted over time? Are there some technologies that have remained constant and there are those which have changed? We have had a number of events. I asked it at the start. Colonialism, we have the state formation. Uganda became an independent country. So during that time, how those events, we have the Idi Amin regime you mentioned in your book. Now, the question is, can you let us know which ones have remained unchanged and those which have changed, which technologies have changed?
The 4 stages involved in the technology, that is the preparation, the spreading and lynching, and then the boiling, have remained in the same way that they started this technology during the time of the Nyasimba, giving them instructions. What has entirely changed within these technologies are the tools that are being used by the women to carry on.
Thank you. That's what I wanted, because you say, because tools are part of technology. That's why a bit particular on, has technology remained the same? Or the stages have remained the same? So that one, it's okay. Next question. This perennialism theory has been critiqued for emphasizing conservation or conservativeness and resisting change. In light of this critique, how did you respond to the possibility that some of the indigenous salt-making practices may have adapted to modern contexts?
In my study, I totally disagreed with the criticism to perennialism theory, where they are saying that if you don't adapt change, then you are being conservative. To me, conservatism does not believe that you don't believe in change. And change does not entirely mean that you're modern. That is why with the women of Chibiro, where they would adapt change, they had to adapt it, for example, from changing from the pots to the use of saucepans and the plastics. But they believed in unchanging their beliefs, their practices, their skills, and their knowledge. And because of that, they have been able to keep on producing the salt, which salt is the source of their livelihood in the area. So it doesn't entirely mean that when I don't change, I'm conservative. That is, I did not agree with the criticism.
Okay. Before I go to another question, where you disagreed with the criticism, what did you do?
Where I disagreed with the criticism, I went on to use what the perennialism theory advocates for. And in this case, that is why I had to complement the perennialism theory with the liberal feminism.
Yes, that's what I wanted. The liberal feminist theory. That's why you brought it. The weaknesses of the perennialism theory were solved somehow with the introduction of this second theory. Now, this theory of the liberal feminism emphasize addressing inequalities. Not so? It advocates for rights of women and other disadvantaged categories. Now, the question, could you clarify how you investigated gender relations and how women's roles in salt production specifically contribute to the maintenance and the transformation of indigenous technology?
The role of the women contributes to the continuity of the technology in a way that the women take the salt making practice as their role, as their work, as the only source of the livelihood. But at the same time, when the women carry on this salt making technology, they believe that they own these gardens. And even the inheritance of the gardens is still on the side of the matrimonial side, where woman to a woman. This has led to no conflicts within owning the salt gardens, since the men are not involved in either the work or in the ownership of the gardens. And in this case, there is that piece which leads to the continuation of the technology.
Okay. Did you find all the women the same? Were women homogeneous? The question is, if women were not the same, what differences, or why didn't you use the intersectionality theory to bring out those intersections or the statuses like marital status, uh, level of education, how they affected adoption of the surrogate making technologies, but it wasn't part of yesterday. Yeah, in the interest of time, I will leave some of the questions. I move to methodology briefly because I'm told that I have only 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes, so let me go to. I have to skip some of the questions I had prepared. Now, given that, I good. Okay. Yeah, I can leave the sampling. Now I come to data collection challenges. I remember you asserting that you interviewed old people. True? Now, if you interviewed old people, I think these old people have already started losing their memory. Not so? How do we, or convince us to believe your findings because you are told by old people, very old people?
It is not basically that all of them were very old people, because I started with the age of 45, and the oldest there was 107 years. With the woman of 107 years, I kept on visiting her, and from the conversations, I could keep on picking the important data. And as I interview the very old, and I also interview from the 45, the information got from the very old could be the same information got from these people. And some of these ones will tell you, my grandmother taught me this or told me this. For instance, the story of Nyasimba, which clearly really showed that it was true information.
Okay. Then somewhere you also mentioned that you reached saturation level. Also, how did you
Yes.
determine the saturation level?
I determined the saturation level after getting similar data, similar information from whoever I could continue interviewing.
Good. So in the interest of time, let me go to the recommendations. Let us move to the recommendations. Okay. Somewhere in your book, I know these are summarized. You mention or you emphasize the central role of women in maintaining sorority practices. How do you see that? How do you view or see the future of women's leadership in the industry, since the younger generation is not involved in sorority mining? Your pictures did not show that. No, in the book, do not show that you interviewed any younger one. And you mentioned that many of the educated younger children are not involved in sorority mining. So how do you see the future of Kibiro sorority mining?
Actually, I did not interview the young generation. I started with 45, basically because of the nature of the study. because I was looking at changes, continuities, and the survival. So I believed from 45 they had the knowledge.
So where do you see the future?
I see the future of this technology still cropping up in the young children. Within the study, I indicate clearly that the young girls start getting the knowledge, the skills that govern this technology from the years of 10. That is when they are instituted into the activity. Meaning that from the age of the 10, these girls are learning how to make the salt at Chibiro.
Okay, thank you. I think I can stop there.
Thank you so much.